Baldur's Gate Tactics, the importance of summons. That's what we're going to explore in this Baldur's Gate vlog, understanding that while Baldur's Gate is a narrative role-playing game, fantastic primary story, a lot of amazing side quests taking you from chapter 1, 2, Siege, all the way up to Throne, but at its core, it's a combat simulator. Fighting classical Dungeons & Dragons monsters and making your way through the narrative. But this is built on the advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition rule set. And once you begin to explore that side of the Tactica, we're digressing a little bit into D&D history, you understand how the tactics of the game was intended to be played. I mean, at the time of its initial release, AD&D 2nd edition was the thing. And then, of course, once we got 3.5 and 3.x, you're making your way into Neverwinter Nights. And I imagine future D&D games will build on future rule sets. But within that snapshot of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, there was no challenge rating. There was no power curve. It wasn't like, well, essentially once you made your way out of Candlekeep, and there's no spoilers here in BG1, it's open sandbox. You had a couple of leads of where to go, what to do, but you could wander around and encounter anything you want. And even at the lower levels of BG1, levels 1 to 8, although level 8 in AD&D, you started to get into the named character classes. That was a big deal. But levels 1 to 3, you got squashed by everything in AD&D. And here you are in BG1, especially if you're coming into that new. Where's the trainer? Why don't things scale? This isn't Skyrim. This isn't baby cakes. You got to be really, really careful and work extremely well. And you have to know sometimes it's best to run away and fight again. Or looking to say, based on my current level where I am, if I fight, what it's going to cost me in terms of expenditures of wands and potions and other things, it might not be worth it. Maybe I should come back after I gained a level or two, because there is no challenge rating in the game. It's not balanced in that way. The Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set was also very, very lethal. It's essentially a one-to-one port. And Advanced Dungeons & Dragons made the assumption that while you had the adventuring party, hirelings, NPCs were always an important part of the party. So when you rolled up with a classical AD&D party, you had 2, 3, 4, or 5 players playing their player characters. But then based on the gold that you had, based on the contacts, and based on your charisma, you would hire literally hirelings. And they can range anything from warriors to thieves and rogues to sages to someone to literally maybe watch your camp and cook your meals. You could hire pets, you could hire war dogs, you could hire all these different, or buy all these different add-ons to your party. So on paper, an Advanced Dungeons & Dragons party, while there was no challenge rating, it was a collection, it was an assortment of various things working with the party. Now we bring that over to BG1. Yes, you have the NPCs. Absolutely, you can solo run, you can hardcore run, but the game at its core is set up for you as the primary tune, and then you've got NPCs that you pick up along the way. But also layered over that are summons and hirelings and how important this is in the game. So within that framework, AD&D just assumes it. The first hirelings are monsters or hirelings that join you for a specific part of the quest. They kind of go on their own AI. You have a limited control over, you can direct them, you can tell them where to attack, but they're not like the NPCs that join your party. You don't have access to their stat block. You don't have access to equipping them. You can buff them, right? If you cast Bless and they're within the radius, they'll buff them. You can haste them, but they're with you for a limited point of time or for something very, very specific. And some have timers, some don't have timers. Layered over this are the summons. Now, the various character classes can summon various things. Usually what you see are divine and arcane, summoning various animals to fight with you. summoning various elementals, woodland beings and creatures if you're a druid. And then there's a couple of other character classes with their abilities, their primary or secondary abilities that give you summons. A perfect example is the shaman. They don't have the shapeshift. They've got some access to some druid spells to summon, but they can also summon and interact with a random assortments of spirits. AD&D assumes you're going to have your party, your NPCs, and your summons. So the first thing based on your party composition, what you've selected, you want to be summoning. You want to have those always going. And as you level up, that's what's going to happen. Summon Monster 1 is eventually going to be replaced by Summon Monster 2, Summon Monster 3. Then you'll make your way towards the various elemental summons, keep on upgrading. We see this on a side note with gear in Baldur's Gate. As you uncover more gear, you're going to go from not so great weapons and not so great armor to solid weapons and, while not magical armor, maybe plate or full plate. Then you're going to go to magical armor, magical weapons. Then you're going to have other rings and cloaks and headgear. Just as you're constantly upgrading your gear and selling off the old gear, and that needs to keep pace with your level and where you are in the game, at the same time, you need to make your summons also keeping pace. So as they increase, you'll drop the lower stat summons and replace them with the higher stat summons. But there's a limit to how many you can have. I don't know the game code behind it from that perspective, whether the limit was just for balancing reasons, whether the limit was at the time, this is all that we can accommodate in terms of control and performance. On a side note, in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, hirelings and summons, you could have as many as you want. I mean, we would have like a massive group, almost like a small army of NPCs, summons, hirelings, henchmen, all this type of stuff. There is a limit, but there is a slight workaround in that, without naming any spoilers, you've got your primary tune, you've got your NPCs, you've got the summons. Now, some summons only last a little while. Some last a lot longer. But then you have certain, without giving away any spoilers, but keep an eye out for them. They're there. You have certain items that allow you to create, allow you to summon, allow you to bring in another summon monster creature that don't stack with that limit. So you can, through various occasions, or like the shaman with his or her ability, the ability to break that here's that hard number. Now, while you've got those summons, it's like when you're gearing up for a potential fight. You send the thief out to scout things out, hide in shadows, do the stealth thing. Then you just start summoning. Buffs also affect summons. So this idea in AD&D being a combat game, every plus something helps. Every plus something helps. So if I can get an additional +1 attack, an additional +1 damage, or a haste or a resistance, and put those on my summons, that is absolutely huge. Now, here's why summons are powerful and they make the game much more manageable, or they break the game if you know how to use them correctly. D&D, AD&D, it's a D20 based game. It's a success or failure. THAC0, to hit armor class 0. And then from there, it stacks down or up depending on the perspective. You can have something with a very, very high armor class. First, you've got to, it's like this flow chart you have to go through. First, you have to hit. Then you're going to do some damage. And the damage you can kind of control based on the weapon, based on the spell. You're going to do some damage. Then you've got to get through possible natural resistances, like spell resistance, or if they would call them immunities, but it might not be a full immunity, resistance to fire, resistance to ice, right? Going through those, resistance through poison. Then you've got some monsters with a natural damage reduction, which they'll take off a couple of points. So you've got to go through a couple of things before you actually hit to the point of causing damage. But the main thing is just to hit. And your character and the NPCs, they generate a certain number of attacks. They increase based on the level. Some character classes have more attacks than others. There are ways to increase your attacks through various buffs, but that limit, while it can be adjusted, it caps. Summons are a way to get more attacks on the table or in the game. If I've got my 2 characters and 2 summons, those are 4 attack points. And being a D20-based system, we're going to put aside immune to non-magical weapons and things like that because that completely takes off the ability to hit unless you're equipped with that. But even if I have just a simple skeleton summoned and I'm going up against a monster that has a very good armor class, rolling a D20 virtually every single turn. This is why I do like to turn on the numbers to be able to see it. You will roll a 20. And if you have multiple summons and you have multiple things going at once, every round of combat, there's a chance to roll 20s. Plus your characters, a chance to roll a high enough number to hit. The more potential D20s you can put down on the table, the more you can hit. And generally speaking, most monsters, unless there's area effects or other things, can only really engage 1-to-1 damage. Now, I've got a primary character. They've got a good amount of hit points. They can potentially take, 2, 3, 4, 5 hits, depending on the monster, depending on the level, before I'm killed. While they're taking hits, of course, I'm going to be having the heals going on if it's a cleric, or I'm going to be popping potions. But that character taking those hits is doing that character attack to the monster. My summons are generally weaker. They might take 1 or 2 hits and then get killed, but they're still generating volume of attacks. So this idea of Tactica with summons, where it's like send out the summons and let the monsters beat on them, they get chewed up very fast and they're done. It's better to hit with a combination of engage the monsters with your primary characters, because they can take some damage and you can heal them. Let the summons be the second wave. So if I have my primary tune and I'm attacking a monster and I've engaged that monster and it's attacking me, and then I take my 2 Skelly summons and put my Skelly bones on them, those are 3 attacks going on that monster. The 2 skeletons will hit the same as I will. If it's a very, very good armor class, you roll an 18, you roll a 19, you roll a natural 20, it increases the damage modifiers tremendously. And of course, we're throwing on buffs and we're throwing on upgrades. You need to master the summons. You need to have your army running, utilizing the different character classes and utilizing certain artifacts or magic items with clicky slots on your bar ready to go. This makes the game a lot more fun because there's a lot of cool summons and tactics that you can utilize. But the game makes that assumption being the AD&D rule set. Now, if you adjust the game up or down, that changes things. Yes, you could do a hardcore run. You could do no summons run. You could say, I want to play all fighters and warriors. I'm not summoning anything. All that is good. But it is a tactic, especially if you're playing through for the first few times. And some of the named or key encounters, they're tough. It's good to have some extra D20s on the table in the game going against what you have to hit. Mastering and understanding it is key.